Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It is so good to gather in person. I am happy to see your faces, albeit masked, but I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. It's my understanding that this event is being recorded so that for those people who weren't able to come, they will still be able to enjoy, learn, and carry this message forward. So we all know that human beings need to be able to meet their basic needs before they can plan for the future. That's just neurobiology. And certainly safe, affordable housing is an essential element of that puzzle, that foundation. Our panelists are here today to talk about how their organizations, are walking with community members as they travel down the path to their goals and to their futures. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce herself or himself, share which organization they're with, the role that organization plays in collaborating towards a better future, and we'll take it from there. I'll start with Ridge Schuyler.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank all of you all. My name is Ridge Schuyler. I am the Dean of Community Self-Sufficiency Programs at Piedmont, Virginia Community College, and the founder of Network to Work. And our role is to try to find people who've been left behind in our economy and connect them to jobs and careers that can lead to family-sustaining wages in collaboration with all the partners you see up here on the stage and more.
Wonderful. So I'm Robbie Respeto. I'm the president of the United Way of Greater Charlottesville. And we're going to be talking about an initiative today called Envision, which is to help families basically scale economically and reduce poverty here in our community, and also about a task force we're involved in. So we're very grateful to be a part of the panel with my colleagues.
Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm just so grateful that this event was sponsored around a really important and personally meaningful issue for me. My name is Janette Kawachi. I'm the Chief Partnership Officer at Habitat for Humanity. I think a lot of people have heard about Habitat for Humanity. We build homes, and we certainly do that. What I think a lot of people don't know is that we're also a land developer, and so we purchase and acquire land. We design and develop entire neighborhoods, largely, pretty much solely mixed income at this point. I think what a lot of people don't know also about Habitat is that we are a lender, and we're also a pretty robust financial empowerment agency. And I think we're going to be talking a lot today about the importance of working on both sides of that affordable housing problem, right? It's not just about building homes. It's really about empowering those families and individuals to become financially resilient so that we're reducing the demand for affordable housing. And so I think Habitat plays a pretty unique space in this role in terms of breaking down some systemic barriers to credit, as well as really empowering those individuals financially to become homeowners.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sunshine Mathon. I'm the Executive Director of Piedmont Housing Alliance. For those who don't know, Piedmont Housing Alliance is the largest provider of affordable rental housing within the region. We serve Charlottesville City and the surrounding 5 counties. We also, in addition, build pathways to homeownership through our down payment assistance program that we've operated for many years, and we're the kind of premier HUD-certified financial counseling agency in the region as well. Recently opened up a financial opportunity center in the former United Way building that brings together multiple organizations, including some here at the table, to provide a bevy of services to folks who are seeking pathways to economic mobility. In addition, we are now in a strong partnership with the Piedmont Community Land Trust to develop additional pathways to homeownership through the Community Land Trust model. And for those who are not familiar, I can share more of that later. But it's a model to homeownership that also prioritizes community impact.
So it will come as no surprise that we really could spend all day on this topic, and we have panelists who are not only committed but are subject matter experts. You do have cards on your chairs, and because there are empty chairs, you have extra cards. So please avail yourself of those as questions come up, because we're going to really try to honor your time and our panelists' time, and we won't be able to get to everything, but we will do the best we can. Okay? So Ridge, I hope that you can set the stage You're the author of the Orange Dot Report, which was first published in 2011. It talks about the prevalence of poverty in our community. Please explain what we learned from the most recent report, and perhaps more important, how does an individual or family bear the burden of being poor?
Wow. So thank you, Alicia. And before I get started, just two housekeeping matters. First, a note of gratitude for Women United in Philanthropy and the incredible work that you all do with your collective efforts. Network to Work was a recipient of a Women United grant back when we were just starting this idea that we had. We started off serving 19 job seekers in 2014, and we've now served over 1,200. And it is because of the great big hearts of people like you that have allowed us to do that. So first, let me just thank you for what you do and your commitment to this community. Secondly, if you don't have this on your chair, I should have known that nobody would sit in the front, some of these brave souls. If you don't have one of these on your chair, feel free to come up and grab one off one of the seats. That will also allow you to grab an extra index card so you can ask an extra question. So just a note to set the stage. So in 2009, I was the district director of the local congressman, and our congressional office was just 4 blocks from here on Garrett Street, across the street from Friendship Court, run by Piedmont Housing Alliance and public housing operated by the city. And we would have people coming into the congressional office and, excuse my expression, they would come into our office and say, "I just want a damn job." And I knew that there were jobs just 4 blocks away at the University of Virginia and many other great employers, yet people were having a hard time finding their way from where they lived to that job that would allow them to earn a decent wage and provide for their families. And when I raised this topic back in 2009 and 10, during the so-called Great Recession with Charlottesville boosters, I got a lot of, "Oh, we don't have a problem in Charlottesville. If you're looking at poverty data, that's just picking up the noise that is created by UVA students who look poor on paper, but are in fact driving around in BMWs and not in fact poor." And I said to myself, the people walking into our congressional office are not UVA students. These are people desperate for quality work. And so we've got to figure out what is the scope of the situation we face in Charlottesville, and then what can we do about it? And so starting in 2011, we began issuing every other year reports that indicated the amount of struggle that exists in Charlottesville, and then we expanded that to the entire region. In 2009 and 10, or actually in 2011, we issued our first report. 29% of Charlottesville's families, not UVA students, but Charlottesville's families, 29% of Charlottesville's families did not earn enough to meet their basic needs. That number is now 22% in the city of Charlottesville, so it's getting better, but it's still 1 out of every 5 families. It's 17% of the families of the entire region. One of the main drivers of the amount of money you need in order to survive in Charlottesville is the cost of housing. And if you have a packet, you'll see that over the 10 years, from the first report to the one we did in 2021, the cost of housing, the cost of rental housing in our community has gone up 36%. But I can assure you, the wages of people at the lower end of the economic scale, their wages have not gone up 36% over that same time period. So people are falling further and further behind as the cost of housing goes higher and higher. And we looked at what does it cost to live in Charlottesville. We didn't look at, which we will talk about, the federal poverty number or anything like that. We said, let's just look at what it costs. So we looked at what does it cost to provide food, stable shelter, clothing, and utilities in order to be a, say, single mom with 2 kids. And it turns out that just to get the income to survive is $30,000. But in order to get that $30,000, you've got to go to work. And when you go to work, you have costs that are associated with working, like childcare and transportation. So it turns out that single mom with 2 kids, one of whom is in childcare, without any kind of support, would have to earn $46,000 a year. But I want to reiterate that the main driver of the cost of living here is the cost of housing. And so when you hear about affordable housing, we're talking about trying to make it so people can support their families. The rule of thumb is that you should spend no more than 30% of your income on housing-related costs. So that would be your rent or your mortgage and utilities. And as you will see in the flyer that I handed out, based on our analysis, about 32% of your income would go to rental housing if you made $46,000 a year. That doesn't even cover the cost of utilities, but that's what it costs to live. And when we talk about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which is a huge boost from the $7.25 an hour that it used to be, at $7.25 an hour, which was the minimum wage until very recently, if you worked full time, you made $14,400 a year. Yet average rent for a two-bedroom apartment is $1,200, or excuse me, is $15,000 a year. So you could work very hard and not even make the rent. We talk about the $15 an hour wage, and that is a great wage, but at $15 an hour, if you only spent 30% of your income on rent, you could afford rent that was $750 a month for your two-bedroom apartment. The cost of rent in Charlottesville now is $1,200 a month and going up. So that is the challenge that we face here in Charlottesville. And part of the challenge, as I mentioned, is that 17% of the families in the region do not earn enough to be self-sufficient, but that burden is not equally shared. In the city of Charlottesville, 54% of black families make less than $35,000 a year. 54% of black families make less than $35,000 a year compared to 13% of white families that make less than $35,000 a year. We have an enormous, shameful income disparity in our city that we need to be intentional about addressing, and I would suggest we need to be as intentional about addressing the problem as we were intentional in creating it. So the burden is not equally shared. You'll see facts in your handouts that you have. And then I will just close my 6 minutes by just talking for a second about the high cost of being poor. You'll see that an example of a situation faced by one of the job seekers that we supported. She moved from Charlottesville to Waynesboro because her son was being bullied in schools here in Charlottesville, so that she moved across the mountain. It took her 3 weeks to get a job. In order to pay the rent during those 3 weeks, she took the only asset that she had, which was her Sienna minivan, and she went to a title lender in order to get money based on her car that she could use to pay the rent. Well, you'll see that the amount of interest that she was charged was 264% on her title loan. So she ended up paying twice as much for the value of her car in order to meet her rent for just 1 month. And because she was late in making her payment, her rent went up $75 a month for the late fee, and she never got ahead, so her rent permanently went up $75 a month. That is the high cost of being poor. If you don't have two nickels to rub together and you run into some kind of problem, you're in a lot of hurt, which is why partners like the ones up on the stage are so essential to our work.
As I said, we could keep you here all day. So Ravi, please tell us about Envision and its, quote, I'm quoting here, bold goal to lift 1,800 families out of poverty in the next 5 years with a specific focus on black families. And say more about the importance of cross-disciplinary partnership.
Absolutely. So I too want to just take a moment to thank Women United for your incredible work in philanthropy. You are obviously incredibly well connected with the United Way, and we're just grateful for the work and the collective impact of your dollars and your leadership here in the community. So United Way works in 3 really specific areas: financial stability, school readiness, and what we call connected community. And you just heard Rich kind of paint the picture of what's happening in the community around poverty, but one of the things that hasn't really changed is poverty's remained pretty intractable. So for 20 plus years, we don't really see a real decrease in it. And why is that? Rich has laid out a lot of the reasons that contribute to it, but why can't we seem to reduce it? And so the idea behind Envision is how can we come together as a community and look at how we reduce poverty by coordinating and collaborating with one another. So there are some specific goals that United Way has set for the work that we hope to do in partnership with some of the colleagues you see here and other nonprofits here in our community that are part of our financial resiliency task force. But 1,800 families is a bold goal, and it doesn't happen easily. And we know that there's many interventions that are required to help a family get ahead. And so when we look at that, we look at things like transportation, childcare, affordable access to capital, of course, down payment assistance, rental assistance, homeownership, all of the many things it takes the family to get ahead. And, with rents and affordable housing kind of also being sort of unattainable for the population we're talking about, how do we increase their income? And one of the ways you do it is by making sure that you give them these sort of supports and interventions. So when we look at an early learner scholarship as an example, it's worth about $15,000 a year to a family, which is significant when your average family that we're talking about is earning about $30,000 a year. It's all $25,000 to $35,000 a year. Ridge has identified in the report that you have there, the Orange Dot report, that $45,000 a year is what it takes to have a survival income. And if you think about your own incomes and you think about what it would mean to live on $45,000 a year, you know it'd be challenging in our community. And that is for a family of three, if two of the children are under the age of 18 and one's in child care. So those are the types of things that we're thinking about. School readiness is another, like I said, big focus for the United Way. You know, we really look at this as a multi-generational issue. Solving generational poverty starts with children, families, adults. And so when we look at our youngest members of our community, we want to make sure they're prepared to learn when they get to kindergarten. So one of the goals of Envision is to make sure that children pass developmental milestones and literacy benchmarks with an increase in 10% the next 5 years when they enter kindergarten. And that's significant. To Ridge's point, we see a lot of discrepancies and disparities when it comes to our Black families. And, you know, we're really honest with ourselves about that. That has a lot to do with systems of racism that have existed in our community always. And they're at every level of systems that people have to access to get ahead in life. So that's education, that's health, that's banking systems. And until we're really honest about what those issues are, it's hard to solve them. So the other piece of Envision is to have honest dialogue and conversation about what's happening here in our community and really across the United States, but certainly Charlottesville has our own complicated history around that. So our connected community work really focuses on an educational platform. We do things like a radio program. We have community table where we bring members of the community together to have honest conversations. But the United Way being a connector and a convener wants to bring people and is bringing people together to have these honest conversations now, which help educate all of us about what the pervasive problems look like. We're coming out of COVID. It's been a really difficult time, and United Way was involved in collaborating with the city and the county to disperse pathway funding. And when we start looking at the numbers of who are accessing those funds, it's a pretty sobering statistic. So overall, we had about 3,000 families involved in getting funds. And if we look at the county, 47% of them were Black, where only 19% were white. If we look at the city, 68% were Black and 14% were white. So that's what's happening right now in the community. And if we look at a partnership that we did right when COVID hit with the Community Foundation, the city and the county, also very stark. Families that were Black accounted for over 2,000 people that were accessing those funds, where only 1,200 families were white. And these are just some of the data points. I mean, I have reams of data here about education disparities, which are you know, very discouraging, frankly, when you look at who's in advanced honors classes or who has access to advanced honor classes, who's graduating from high school, who's going on to college. So the whole idea around this is we need to have an honest conversation about what's happening here in our community. And then the whole next thing is like, how do we solve this problem, right? It's so pervasive. Where do we start? And so the Financial Resiliency Task Force met starting in 2019. So it's 8 nonprofits. 3 of my colleagues are represented here, and we've actually been meeting just about every month for almost the past 3 years, just to get to the point of where we're going to finalize an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding in the next month. And that memorandum is going to spell out how our organizations look at tackling the problem, because again, we recognize that not just one of our organizations can do it alone. It really takes collaborative nature to get this work done. We're fortunate that Ridge has put together a network tool, a referral tool, so we'll be utilizing that, but we'll be adding additional questions so we can start to get an understanding of what the population that we're going to be working with is really struggling with from a systems level. So we're going to focus on Black families only for 5 years, Black families that earn 200% or less of the federal poverty level. We'll talk a little bit about what that means later in the program. And we're going to do a coordinated referral network so that those families are supported by a group of nonprofits that want to help them reach their own financial goals and achieve financial success. And that's really, really key, because what it works out to be now is a family might call United Way, they may call Network to Work for job training, they may call Habitat for housing, but they're really tasked with having to go to several agencies to get the support they need versus having the agencies rally around them and be a support system to them. So one of the prevailing goals is to make sure that we do that work better, and then we're going to collect data by having them in one referral closed loop network, which hasn't really been done at this level in a really coordinated way. And as we gather that data, we'll better understand what are the gaps in services and where do we need to provide more resourcing to make sure families are getting the help that they need. So at any rate, that effort will kick off. We'll start taking clients hopefully this spring, and we're excited and committed to it. You know, and a group of people shows up month after month to make something happen, you know that we're all in. But it's complicated to figure out how we convene and collaborate. We all have different missions, visions, funding needs, things of that nature. So it really does take looking outside of our own organization to our broader community to figure out what's the best way to approach a difficult subject.
Thanks, Ravi.
It took more than 6 months.
That's okay. I'll subtract them later. Sunshine, it's a short question, but it's not an easy one. What does the affordable housing landscape look like today?
That is not a short question. There are entire conferences focused on that question, not just 6 minutes. But before I begin, actually, Alicia asked me just to reflect on, well, let me back up. A few weeks ago, for those of you who don't know, Friendship Court, the redevelopment broke ground, and that was a momentous moment. And one of the things that we decided to do at the outset of that groundbreaking was a land acknowledgement of the history of that piece of land. I don't know the specific history of this particular location, but I do think it's important to acknowledge, at the very least, that this land was honored and lived upon by the sovereign Monacan people. This land is the ancestral home of incredibly resilient people who stand upright today, of people who have survived attempted genocide and cultural erasure. This land was their home. I don't think we can talk about the context of today without acknowledging the past. And there is, I'm sure, a much longer story about what happened on this specific parcel. With that in place, it's hard to know where to begin to talk about the state of affordable housing. In 2020, right before COVID hit, if you look big picture, if you look nationally, there was not a single county, not a single city, anywhere in our nation where somebody working minimum wage could afford to live and rent a 2-bedroom apartment. Nowhere. It's easy to talk about that as a broken housing system. I've used that phrase in the past, and it gets thrown around regularly. I would counter that and say, actually, it's a system, and the outcomes that we see, the system produces those outcomes. So the system was designed to produce those disparities and produce that pervasive, ongoing poverty and struggle for families. And in particular, that system was designed to benefit some folks more than other folks. And that distinction is clearly driven by race. Over the last century and more, this country, nationally, at the state level, and here locally, have devised how we live in adjacency to each other or not, where jobs are in adjacency to where people want to live or not, the quality of schools, the access to healthcare or not. All of those things were devised and constructed through the lens of race in our nation. And fundamentally, if all we do is to try to operate within the system, we will continue to persist and maintain those. And yet, we have to operate in the system, because if we don't, people's lives are at risk. We have to provide the housing that is so desperately needed that others, my colleagues here, have already talked about. We have to provide that housing. We have to operate within the system. And at the same time, we also have to be casting a vision to the future about what's possible for a renewed system that actually does fundamentally work for everyone. I think the moment we are in here in Charlottesville is, and this is a little bit of a microcosm, but the moment we are in Charlottesville, where recently, about a year ago, the City Council approved an affordable housing plan. That led into a comprehensive plan update on the focus of housing. That the comprehensive plan was approved by City Council at the end of 21. And we are now in the early stages of re-engaging our zoning infrastructure and looking at how zoning plays out in our city. I know that the comprehensive plan brought out lots of fear and struggle about change in our city. And as we look to the rezoning that's coming down the pipeline and over the next year, those issues are going to be re-engaged. It's going to be, I guarantee you, it is going to be a difficult conversation. And yet, if we maintain the existing system that we have, where more than 60% of our land area within our 10.5 square miles are relegated to simply single-family zoning that preserves wealth in the hands of the few, we will persist the same disparities onward. And it doesn't matter how much work Habitat does. It doesn't matter how much work we do. It doesn't matter how much work the other folks here are doing. The system will maintain. We have to be looking at, again, both sides of the spectrum. We have to be looking at how the systems need to be reconstructed to make it work for everybody, which means that we have to think about a different way of living in adjacency to each other. There's the civic mandate there on some level. And we have to be investing in the affordable housing efforts that organizations like Up Here on the Table and others are doing. Because fundamentally, as you all I'm sure know, the cost of housing, not only was it bad 2 years ago, but the pandemic has sent it through the roof. And that's not just true in Charlottesville, that's true across the nation. The only way to build affordable housing that is affordable to the folks that we're talking about is through subsidy and through being flexible and creative with how we define land use and where people live. The work that we are trying to do as an organization, recognizing that race was the fundamental framework through which our systems have been constructed. Frankly, we have to be looking at those same systems, again through the race lens, to understand how to target solutions. So from our perspective, as an organization at Piedmont Housing Alliance, we are in the process of evaluating every piece of work that we do and asking the question, does it actively close the racial wealth gap? If it doesn't, it needs to be revised and retooled so that it does. Or if it can't be, it needs to be deprioritized. Fundamentally, we have to be doing that work. Otherwise, the existing conditions will persist, and there will always be more people in crisis that have to be served through, efforts like we're talking about here today. I'll pause there.
And I have a segue question. Don't turn the microphone just yet. So resiliency is not something you either have or don't have. You're not born with it or without it. It's something that can be built and it can be strengthened, and it helps people move down the path from where they are to where they want to be in the face of extraordinary adversity. But you guys also talk about financial resiliency. So, and then we'll segue to Janette, but talk about how you have incorporated that approach into your work.
So I want to refer back to what Ridge started with, which is, and I think Robbie mentioned this, and maybe Janette, that there are, yes, we need to be building affordable housing because there are folks who can't afford the places they live currently. There is no question about that. And the other side of the equation is if we can provide pathways for folks to make to make a living through jobs that they can keep and maintain, they can afford the market that's out there. So we have to be doing both at the same time. And part of that effort for us as an organization is, I mentioned briefly, the creation of the Financial Opportunity Center, which is a model developed by LISC, which is a national intermediary across the country. There are now over 100 financial opportunity centers across the nation. I think the one here in Charlottesville is now the 4th or the 5th one in Virginia. The basic premise is that it becomes a one-stop shop entry point for financial and housing counseling, for employment navigation and advocacy, and for benefits navigation, at a minimum. That the idea is to have those three things tied together. In addition, our FOC has gone a little bit further, and so we actually got some recent funding from both the state and from grants to expand that to include housing navigation services, to include eviction prevention services, and also landlord outreach services. because one of the real constraints that people who have dedicated vouchers for themselves, or housing vouchers, struggle to find landlords who will accept the vouchers. And that's another real barrier to opportunity. So having somebody to dedicate it to growing the awareness of how the system works so that folks can access housing in other parts of the community is really, really critical. That FOC model, the Financial Opportunity Center model, is going to be a backbone, I think, for the city in the coming years. It opened just in October, so it's still getting its legs under it, but it's going to make a significant difference.
Thank you. Janette, Habitat also has years of experience working both sides of the equation, providing housing, but also providing families with the skills and the resources they need to move forward. Tell us more about the Pathways approach that Habitat uses.
Yeah, gosh, Pathways is just thrown around like, like the word that, there's a lot of programs here with the word Pathways in it, but I think it's an appropriate name. So Pathways to Housing is something that Habitat started about 3 years ago, and it really came out of a bit of a listening tour that we did amongst applicants to our homeownership program. So we get, on average, over 200 applications a year for homeownership. We have, as Habitat, we've grown as an affiliate. Just 10 years ago, we were building 5 to 10 homes a year. 5 years ago, we ramped up to 20 homes a year, and as of 2022, we'll be ramping up to 40 homes a year that we'll build and sell. But when we were getting 200 plus applications a year and building 20 homes a year, that meant we were denying 9 out of 10 families that were coming through our door. And talk about burnout. That was incredibly hard on applicants. It was incredibly hard on staff. And we just said, okay, we gotta figure out how we can do something different. And so I personally had conducted about 45 interviews with applicants that were denied from the homeownership program. I'm surprised that they actually opened the door to me to speak to me, but they were very gracious, and and the interviews were basically sort of trying to understand, where are you financially? What are your housing goals? What is it that Habitat and the system can do to really make a difference? And it was really interesting what I heard. Of course, we heard the typical, right? Like, oh, it's always been a dream to be a homeowner. I want to have something to pass on to my children. It's just an opportunity for me to have a permanent place to call home in Charlottesville. But the other thing that really stood out to me was that, every one of these people had applied to PHA or to the Housing Authority, were on long wait lists for public housing, had applied for every single affordable housing opportunity in this community, right? They were just desperate for an affordable place to live. A lot of people told me, I don't even want to be a homeowner. I just need an affordable place to live. And Habitat is one of those. And they knew it was sort of like, buying a lottery ticket in some ways, because we build 20 homes a year. But that sort of level of kind of profound desperation and hopelessness in terms of searching for housing, what really came out of those interviews. And also, they said, I'm tired of just being told no, right? That my income is too low or my debts are too high. Why can't you just help us get to yes? Why can't you do that? Nobody is helping me get to yes. And so, and that's what really sort of inspired this idea for the Pathways to Housing program. So Pathways is really sort of a wraparound financial empowerment program. And it's open to those who apply to our homeownership program, but they're denied because their income is too low or their debts are too high. And instead of our traditional response of like, no, I'm sorry, you don't qualify, best of luck, we'll say, yes. Right? I see that this is what you want. I see that you're willing to partner with us and to make changes and to do what it is that you can to partner with us to meet your financial goals. And so that's really kind of the goal. And this Pathways program really depends on, again, collaboration. You've heard a lot about collaboration and collective efforts, and We rely on Network to Work to help our folks, find higher paying jobs. We rely on the United Way, the Family Investment Program, which is a sort of direct grant program for families, right? Where our families can get up to, $13,000, $14,000 to help them do things like repay, bad collections or debts. And the Financial Opportunity Center, of course. And so it's really a program that's meant to kind of provide those wraparound financial supports to really help people not just get into, habitat home ownership, right? So if you meet your financial milestones, you're allowed to kind of automatically graduate and sort of enroll in the habitat home ownership program. But in fact, a lot of people don't do that. They don't want to be homeowners, and that's great, right? They just want to be financially empowered, and they want better housing. And so we oftentimes help them navigate the housing market and try to, after they've sort of reduced their debts and improved their credit, we help them kind of navigate and find a better rental in a better neighborhood. Or, we help them connect to a realtor or an affordable lender to buy a home in surrounding areas where homes are more affordable. And so it's really about choice. And this is really about, I think Pathways is sort of where that work comes together, right? Where we're, tackling both sides of the affordable housing problem, but we couldn't do it without the partnerships in the community that help us really kind of, it takes a village, right? To support families and to make sure that they have pathways to financial stability.
I'm going to stay on this side of the table and ask. I'll get back. Don't worry. I haven't forgotten about you guys. But this is a two-part question. Tell us about the projects that are underway and those that are in development, because there is a lot going on. And then the follow-up to that is, once complete, if all of the pieces fall together for those projects, where will we stand with the gap between the need for safe, affordable housing and the availability? So
I'm glad you stayed on that side of the table.
I will try to keep this focused. So there are three major initiatives of redevelopment with resident leads in the Charlottesville region. One of which is Friendship Court, another which is public housing overall, and the third of which is Southwood, operated by Habitat. Collectively, I don't know the exact numbers, but over the multiple phases, because each of those projects is phased with the explicit intention to have zero displacement throughout the redevelopment process. And that's an extraordinary moment. So I know what I talked about before was a little bit of a heavy, which is true. And we are actually doing something really extraordinary here in Charlottesville that I actually don't think is replicated anywhere else in the country at this scale relative to the city size. The redevelopment of those three locations, each with their own flavor and set of goals driven by their respective communities, is really a moment in time. And Friendship Court, as an example, will go from 150 to 450 apartments and homes, not just apartments. There'll actually be some home ownership as well over the next 6 to 8 years through those four phases. I don't know the total number of phases and the total number for public housing's redevelopment, but I believe it's something like a doubling or tripling of the total number of units. Habitat is going to grow 350 trailer homes to 1,000-ish. Homes in rental, home ownership, etc. So those are all major redevelopments that are happening. Additionally, I'll speak to Piedmont Housing Alliance and what we have sort of in our quote-unquote pipeline. You may have heard that there are two projects which we are pursuing in the north downtown area, one of which is a redevelopment of the MACA site in partnership with MACA, so that they would actually rebuild some early learning facilities on site there. And that would be a partnership with Habitat as well, so it'd be a combination of affordable rental and affordable home ownership. We're also talking about a partnership with the Park Street Christian Church to build some affordable senior housing on their community, partnering with the Hinton Avenue Church to build 15 units of housing that will be serving both seniors and folks with disabilities. And we are partnering with another affordable rental project in Southwood with Habitat. And then there are a few others as well at a smaller scale. And I talked about the Community Land Trust earlier, and I'll just say quickly that the Community Land Trust model is a shared ownership model, but it's a true home ownership model for the individual residents as well, the homeowners themselves. The Piedmont Community Land Trust is the oldest CLT, Community Land Trust, in the state of Virginia, but it was run by a volunteer board-run nonprofit for many years, so their capacity for development was pretty small. We have partnered with them, Piedmont Housing Alliance and the Piedmont Community Land Trust, to the point where we are, within a year, we'll likely have 38 new homes and aiming to grow that even further in the city and beyond in the surrounding county as well. The other big planning opportunity coming down the pipeline is UVA. UVA committed a couple of years ago to develop, or not themselves develop, provide the land for the development of between 1,000 and 1,500 affordable homes over the coming next decade. About in November, maybe-ish, they announced what those 3 sites were. I don't know if everyone's seen what the 3 sites are. One of which is downtown. One of which, and 2 of which are in the county, although one where is at the edge of the city-county line, and then the third big one is up near the airport. Between the 3 sites, I've looked pretty deeply at those 3 sites. I think the goal that the university set out is achievable, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 homes. Just as setting the stage for what's to come, they're anticipating issuing an RFQ for developer partners in May, and then an request for qualifications. So that means that then out of that, they will select a smaller group for an invited RFP, request for proposal, to become the developer partner, and then those developer partners will be working with UVA over the coming decade to build those sites out. In total, if you look forward 10 years, this was your question about what the impact. Right now, in 2018, the city's housing needs assessment identified a gap of around 3,300 need for 3,300 housing interventions. That's not necessarily the need for 3,300 units, because we know that there are not 3,300 households on the street in Charlottesville. But many of those families are paying far more than they can afford, or are doubled up, or living in a condition that is unstable effectively and that they cannot afford. So by the time, as we look at a decade and nothing else happens other than the 3 redevelopments we just talked about, and we look at UVA land, I would say we are, a half to 2/3 of the way there, roughly speaking. Now, at the same time, that study also said the need is going to grow over the next decade. So it's true that if you take this moment in time and look at that number of units, we will have theoretically addressed somewhere between a half and 2/3 of that need, but the need will grow over that arc of time as well. Sorry, I got away from the microphone there. So it's hard to say exactly. And that's where the critical work that Ridge is taking on through Network to Work, which is if we can stem that tide, if we can grow opportunities for people to make living wages, maybe we can slow down that growing gap. And we have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, so I'll just add that, I can't emphasize enough that, the need for affordable housing in this community is dire, but this is truly a really unprecedented moment in our history where we're putting residents first, right? This notion that there are 3 major redevelopment initiatives happening, all resident-led, right? Resident involved. Residents are, very deeply involved in the planning process. And that are really focused on not displacing residents, and that is a giant commitment. And I think, as you get drowned in some of the numbers, I think that particularly for an audience who's not particularly deep into housing, I think this is a really important message, right? That it's not just about what we produce, but how we produce it is so critical. And I think in Southwood, for example, I personally have never been so challenged I know I look like a college student sometimes, but I've actually been in affordable housing for 20 years, and I have never, ever in my life been so challenged by my work in affordable housing as I have in terms of navigating redevelopment in Southwood. Right, there are 1,500 individuals living there in 320 aging trailers, aging infrastructure. The trailer park opened, in the 50s. So some of the trailers are that old. The infrastructure is that old. There is failing septic systems, so sewage, pools in certain areas. We have to pay weekly to pump it out of the park to make sure that we maintain a healthy environment. There are over 300 decommissioned oil tanks underneath the trailers. So we have to remediate the soil that's contaminated. All of that has to happen before we even start the land development activities of putting new infrastructure in. And this is the price tag. This is what it takes to do it right? So we are, just like many of these other agencies, going through the redevelopment process in stages, in phases, so that we don't have to displace in Southwood, even temporarily, individuals. And to try to do that in a trailer home park, we are physically placing 45, 50, 60-year-old trailers are onto trucks and moving them across the park and putting them down, right? Or we're rehabbing them because some of the trailers are just so old and falling apart that we can't salvage them. But this is what it takes to not displace it. And we're not willing to push people out of the park, because even if once they leave the park, we know that exponentially increases the chance that they will never come back. And so that has always been our true north, that we are going to do this without tearing apart this community that has been here for so many years. And so, I can't emphasize enough that, this, and I don't want to dismiss this moment, right, in the history of the city and the county, just millions and millions of dollars going towards affordable housing. Events like this happening, people paying attention to affordable housing, it's incredible. And the momentum is what probably gives me the most hope for the future of this community. And so, there's not a single day that goes by that I'm so grateful to be able to live in a city like this, where my children have incredible educational opportunities, world-class health facilities, restaurants, hotels, arts, views, all of that. This is something, a zip code determines not just your health, all of the opportunities that are open to you in the future. And as my husband says, well, that's how the market works. Well, I don't want to live in a world where the market determines opportunity. And so that's why this issue of affordable housing is so crucial and so important to me, because it is absolutely ground zero when it comes to determining what's open, what opportunities are open to you in the future. But again, I'm so grateful for the moment that we're in right now.
We are almost at time, so first I'm going to thank you for your incredible attention, and I know that you are learning an awful lot this morning. If you have questions, we have people who will pick them up, so if you raise your card, we'll do our best to collect them and may be able to get to one or two. While that is happening, I'm going to turn to this side of the table, and I'm just going to,
This has been the hardest thing for Rich ever.
I know.
So you're on the stand.
We have all noted your incredible restraint. So, but I'm going to start with you. So, okay. What do you want this audience to take away? Is there something that they can do? Is there a message that you want them to carry out into the rest of their day and to all the people they talk to?
The first is to piggyback off of what Janette said, is that you can get lost in all the numbers. 10,000 families that struggle to make ends meet. Those are actual people that exhibit an enormous amount of resiliency to survive in an economy where coin is the coin of the realm, and they don't have coin, often because they have been intentionally denied it. There is work that is being done by this group, but mainly by the families themselves, to figure out how to get out of this morass that we have created. Affordable housing is housing that people can afford. And so we do need to work on both sides of the equation. We need to build housing that people can afford, but we also need to help them raise their income so they can afford the housing that already exists. And fortunately, we talk to hundreds of employers who have jobs, employers desperate to hand money to folks, poor or otherwise. And we start with employers because, like the famous bank robber Willie Sutton, when he was asked, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. Why do we talk to employers? Because that's where the money is. We have $14 million worth of available income in the Network to Work platform waiting for that struggling family to grab it and us to support that family with affordable housing, with family stability, with child care subsidies, so that we can help that family get to where they're trying to go, which is ultimately happiness, and happiness depending on having dominion over yourself and your family, being in control of what happens to you and what happens to your kids. It is hard to do that when you have to go around town asking for help all the time. So what you can do, besides the incredible generosity you provide, is there are many opportunities for volunteering across all of our organizations. It doesn't matter which one. But for example, at Network to Work, we have navigators that walk along the pathway with that family to help them overcome obstacles that they find. So become a navigator at Network to Work. Volunteer on United Way days. Do sweat equity, or do the work alongside families that are doing sweat equity to build homes with Habitat. There are things that you can do that make an enormous difference in the actual lives of the 10,000 individual families who are struggling in our community, and I applaud you for your being here and for the work that you've already done.
Same question.
Same question. So you've heard us talk about debt to income ratio. You've heard us talk about increasing income, how important credit scores are, broken systems, racial disparities, and you've heard us talk about a lot of solutions. So affordable housing, how do we increase income? But the part we haven't really talked about so much is just reducing expenses and the subsidies and interventions that really help families get ahead. It's all about how much money are you earning every month and how many expenses do you have so that you can just like literally make ends meet. And one of the programs I just want to mention is Driving Lives Forward and our UW to Work program. We work very closely with Ridge to make sure that our clients are able to get affordable transportation. The big issue in our community, outside of the things we've already talked about today, is transportation. You cannot get to work if you don't have a car. We had a recent client that came to us that was referred through Network to Work, has been with Network to Work for quite some time, had earned her CNA, and she went out to buy a vehicle at a local dealership that we partner with. Because she has low credit and she doesn't have high income, she is a CNA, so she probably earns $35,000 a year. She got a near 16% interest rate, which is still vastly better than the 200% that you heard Rich talk about. But how that plays out is it meant she'd have a car payment each month of about $420 or $430. And when you're making $2,000 a month, how are you supposed to make that work? But they were just about to close the loan for this client when we got the call that, could we do the Driving Lives Forward program? So essentially, we were able to refinance the loan to 5%. We were to give a $1,000 down payment. The local dealership, Carter Myers, gave $1,000, and we were able to get her down to about $300 a month. So a lot of it is just about brass tacks interventions that we can do to support a family. The scholarship program, you heard me talk about it earlier, is very much the same thing. If you can get $15,000 and actually up to $20,000 for infant toddler right now, that's the cost of infant toddler care in the state of Virginia. It's about $20,000 a year. So if you can get a subsidy and you can get that paid for, that's $20,000 more that's in your pocket. It makes a huge difference. Seville Tax Aid Program, you can get earned income tax credit if you're a head of household single parent. That can be anywhere from $1,000 to $6,000 back into your budget. You heard Janette talk about Pathways Program. The Family Investment Program is what we call that grant that she talked about. And I'll just quickly share, I know we don't have much time, but I'll quickly share just a couple of quick results from that, because it really is profound that only $10,000 to $13,000 can make a significant difference for families. So we've had 12 families go through that program. The average credit score when they started was 542, and when they left it was 611. So that was just in 1 year. The average monthly income was at $2,400, and after they're in the program, it went up to about $2,800, so an increase of 12%. Hourly wages went from $14.58 up to $17.37. So again, these are like quick. This is over like a year or 2 years that we're seeing really quick improvements. Also, we had 3 homeowners at the end and 8 renting with 3 pending home purchases. So several of those families were coming out of public housing, a few from West Haven. So again, we see small investments when collaborative, done in a collaborative manner, make significant differences for our local families. So I would just say that it's really all of the things, right? It takes all of the things, and to bring it kind of back full circle, that's why the task force I described earlier is so critical, that if we can work together and we can scaffold and we can support, families will be able to start to get ahead. And our hope, all of our hope, is that you'll see that reduction in poverty locally, specifically for our Black families who suffer highly compared to their white counterparts. I mean, inordinately compared to their white counterparts, for all the reasons you've heard us talk about today. And to Ridge's point, get involved with any of the organizations, and not just the ones that aren't represented here. We have several organizations that work in this space. The CIC, City of Promise, does incredible work. MACA does incredible work. There's many other organizations that are involved in this space, so we encourage you to learn more.
Do you have anything to add to that? Inspiration for the audience. What message do you want them to take?
I echo everything that has been said. Volunteer, donate, participate, learn, etc. I think one of the most important things I think that folks can do is to use your voice. There are a lot of incredibly important initiatives going on both at the city and at the county around zoning, as Sunshine mentioned. An incredible amount of work was put into developing the affordable housing plan that Charlottesville recently adopted, and the county also adopted one as well. But the real work starts right now. Those were ideas, those were frameworks. This is a way that we can codify some of the ideas that we talked about in the affordable housing plan and the comprehensive plan and the future land use map into law, and how we can determine what this community will look like going forward. I can't emphasize enough how important your voice is in those conversations. Just as a shameless plug, Southwood is also going under a rezoning right now. In April or May, we'll be going before the Board of Supervisors for approval for rezoning. That will determine the rate at which we can get Southwood residents into their permanent homes in the future. Again, ask questions, happy to answer any, but your support and your voice and participation in that meeting and those meetings would be incredibly helpful.
Ditto. I'll just echo that your voice is really crucial in this coming year with the rezoning. You have an opportunity to talk to your neighbors, to talk to your city councilors, talk to your planning commissioners, and support what is likely to be a contentious, challenging conversation, to support the idea of the kind of phrase that I use is all kinds of housing in all kinds of places for all kinds of people.
I have your questions, and if I was going to keep you here and give you lunch, we could answer them. But I can't do those things. So before I hand it off to Anna, I'm going to ask Mary Ann Grant to present each of the panelists with a very small token of our appreciation for the time that they've spent today. We will do our best to share these questions with our panelists and follow up with the answers, but we just don't have time to get to them right now. So please join me in thanking Sunshine, Janette, Robbie, and Rich. I'm going to hand it off to Anna Patches, who's the chair of the membership committee.
So Alicia remembers when I was the chair of the membership committee many years ago. But our chair, Libby, has asked me to be her vice chair this year, which is a great honor. And I've been with this organization a long time, and I really love it. I want to thank again Rich Schuyler, Robbie Respeto, Sunshine Mathon, and Janette Kawachi, both for the work that they do for our community and for sharing their wisdom and expertise with us today. So one more round of applause. I also want to thank Alicia because you've moderated this event for many years, and you do it with wisdom and grace. And this is a really important and weighty topic. And thank you. It was wonderful. So thank you. I just want to say we are very grateful for the opportunity to learn about the hard work that's being done by so many committed people in the community to offer high quality, affordable housing to our citizens. Their work has been transformative, as we've learned today. And I hope that this event has helped you not just to learn where we are, but where we need to go, where we're going, what's still left to be done, how we need to get to a more stronger and more equitable community for all our members. We also appreciate the immense learning opportunity. We can only continue moving forward by listening, learning, and collaborating until there's greater racial and economic equality here. Some more thank yous. I'd like to thank our AV company, visionforward.media, and Gwen Cassidy. Thank you. I really want to thank my colleagues at the United Way. Their excellence makes Women United's work possible. So please hand our Women United Steering Committee chairs, all the committees, programming, marketing, communications. I cannot say enough about their hard work. They're all volunteers. They're all like you. They're working, they're raising children, they're caring for family members, and they're here making this event happen. They're concepting it, promoting it, and making sure that we can gather today safely together in the same room after a 2-year hiatus. So we're all here in this space because of them. Thank you. The annual education event has always been a highlight for us. It's open to the public. It's the way that we connect people to all the important work being done. So I'm glad we're back here in person. I want to thank the Women United members in the audience because your philanthropy makes our work possible. Libby told you we've awarded over $700,000 in grants since our founding to organizations that support women and children, many of which are sitting here at this podium. And that is possible through philanthropy. So for those of you who are guests today, please consider joining us. There are membership materials on your chairs. There are multiple membership levels so that we can be open to everybody. And as a collective giving organization, it means we pool our money together and have greater impact. And every member counts, every member votes for the grants and decides how we allocate our resources. And that's really important because we are a collective voice for good in this community. Our guests, thank you for being here. Remember, there's free parking. There's a ticket for you to take. Stop at the membership table on your way out. Grab some membership materials. Visit womenunitedseville.org. I should know that by heart. And join us, please, and help us to make an impact for women and children in our community. And thank you so much for being here today.